Wars aren't fought by countries. They're fought by people. Now, hear their stories in their own words. Honor their service in your own way. At the only museum in America that gives a voice to all our veterans. The National Veterans Memorial and Museum. It's more than a museum. It's the new home of the brave.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the National Veterans Memorial Museum right here in Columbus, Ohio. I'm Lieutenant General Mike Ferreter, and I'm President and CEO of this great American Memorial and Museum. Today, we begin our commemoration of Black History Month. And, it's significant to note that since before we were even a nation and throughout our history, African American fought for the liberty, self-determination, equality, in our great republic, even when they themselves could not enjoy those rights we hold so dear. Throughout our exhibits at the museum, we highlight the role of African Americans that they played in shaping our country. Like any experiment in democracy, it's messy and we don't sugarcoat it. We don't sugarcoat the maltreatment or the enslavement, discrimination of these brave men and women who are so important to our history, our future, and we try to foster discussion in that spirit. In our museum, you can learn about the Harlem Hellfighters, or Dory Miller, the Tuskegee Airmen, Elizabeth Johnson, and so many others. Without their sacrifice and their determination and their faith in the ideals of our country, America just wouldn't be what it is today, a beacon of hope for so many other countries around the world. Now, today we have a unique opportunity to speak with two veterans and general officers to talk about their experience as African American officers in the U.S. military, their leadership lessons, and their empowering story about breaking barriers. Lieutenant General Nadja West is a good friend and an inspiring leader. She recently retired as a senior medical officer in the U.S. Army as a Surgeon General of the Army. And General Lyles is another friend of mine and a supporter of our organization. During his service, he rose to the position of Vice Chief of Staff for the United States Air Force and has served on the board of many great companies after his retirement from the Air Force in 2003. They both led men and women in high-stakes, stressful life and death situations while fighting their own battles as African Americans. As agents of change, they transformed large and small organizations and are great examples for anyone striving to be the best version of themselves. Now, today's program also will be viewed by many across the nation and beyond. And I want to thank Amazon and their Veterans Resource Group and their resource group who highlight this during their Black History Month program entitled Remarkably Black. So welcome to my two friends. It's great to have you with me and to join us today and to be a part of our program to highlight and give the example that you've given to me since the day I've met you and every day since. Nadja, let's start with you if we could. Please introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit about yourself as you grew up and what led you to military service.
Well, thanks, Mike, and it's a pleasure to be with you again. Always good to see you, and I appreciate what you do in leading that great organization you have out there in Columbus. And I definitely want to get out there and see it one day when the weather's a little bit nicer. But a little bit about myself. As you mentioned, I was the 44th Army Surgeon General and Commanding General of U.S. Army Medical Command in my culminating assignment in the military after almost 40 years. And what inspired me to join is right within my family. My dad joined a segregated army in 1939 after growing up in New Orleans, Louisiana, looking for a better life, and he stayed for 33 years. Even though, again, he joined a segregated army, he saw the army evolve and saw the promise that it had. And so he encouraged. He loved. He bled OD green. They used to say it was the color of Army back then because he just really loved the Army. And a true patriot of the United States. He just loved our country, loved our Army, and had my brothers and sisters and I. He kind of gave that same love and zeal for service to us. And so between my 10 brothers and sisters, 11 brothers and sisters. 10 of us have served mainly in the Army. I had one sister in the Navy and one sister that started out as a WAF, as the Women's Army or Women's Air Force Auxiliary. And so that's what inspired me to join my family in their service to our nation.
Thanks a lot, Nadja. And sir, could you introduce yourself to our audience as well, and in a similar way, describe a little bit about your youth and how you came to serve?
Well, thank you, Mike. It's really an honor to be part of this forum, not just for Black History Week, month, but because I've admired and followed General West's career, even though we're in different services, she Army, me, Air Force, and different time frames. I retired in 2003. It's hard to believe, almost 19 years ago. And she just retired within the last year or two. So, but I followed her career and heard so much about her. So it's an honor to share this particular forum with her, and particularly with you, Mike, as the lead. I'm Lester Lyles. I'm a retired Air Force 4-star general. I'm a native of Washington, D.C., born and raised in Washington, D.C. I grew up there as part of the participated in the public school system. And for those who are not familiar with D.C., the public school system in D.C. had its mandatory junior ROTC programs in all of the schools. So I grew up in high school drilling, if you will. It was an Army junior ROTC program, but drilling. And so when I had a chance to go to college, I turned down an appointment to the United States Air Force Academy, primarily because I had never been outside of Washington, D.C., and I didn't know what it was like beyond the borders of Maryland and Virginia. So I stayed in D.C. and went to Howard University, the historical Black college in Washington, D.C. I was an engineering student, but also part of ROTC. Howard, as a land-grant university, ROTC for males was mandatory your first couple of years, and then only if you're going to be part of a military would you get sort of preliminary commission, if you will, and serve another 2 years, which is what I did. I decided to join Air Force ROTC because I've always been interested in science and space and air and flying. And again, because I was used to drilling as part of a junior ROTC, it just seemed like a natural thing to do. I ended up with a scholarship from the Air Force ROTC, which meant that I owed the Air Force time after I graduated. And when I did and got my commission as a young engineer and came into the Air Force, I will tell you that I only planned to spend 4 years as an engineer in the United States Air Force and then get out to do other things. And that 4 years ended up being 36 years and ended up retiring as a 4-star general. I had 2 4-star assignments. One as the Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force. The other as the commander of the Air Force Materiel Command, which was at the time the biggest command in the Air Force, some 80,000 people with a huge budget doing all the research development, all the science and technology, and all the logistics for the United States Air Force. So I proudly served for that period of time and was blessed to have great assignments, but also blessed afterwards to have the opportunity to serve in other capacities, particularly in the civilian form, and to serve other agencies in a civilian form in my post-Air Force career. And I'll stop right there.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Now each of you had your first assignments, and many of those who will watch this are going to be young men and women, sort of in that first 4 years of work. So as you entered into the workplace, there were a variety of factors involved in a number of ways that you were treated, or a number of cultures you fell into that you had to navigate as a young African-American leader. Nadja, would you describe what it was like to be a lieutenant and then a captain in the Army back in the days?
Well, it was, again, so I graduated from West Point in 1982. So I had a little bit of a different experience because I went to medical school. So I was a lieutenant, but really didn't have the typical lieutenant, like platoon leader or those types of things. So I did my residency at Fort Benning, Georgia, after I graduated from medical school at George Washington University. And so, and during those times, I mean, it was, it was challenging. I think sometimes it was, you you had to break down the barriers of individuals who made assumptions that you got to where you were because of some, other than by your own merit, that you were given a position or there was some kind of quota system. And I recall, I got promoted to, major below the zone, and there was a thought, okay, well, you're a twofer, you're a female, and you're an African American, so that's probably why you got promoted. And when they looked at my ORB, my officer record brief, and saw that I deployed to Desert Shield, Desert Storm when I was a resident, which no one else in my year group had, and received a very good rating from a non-medical officer. And when they saw my distinguished graduate award from the flight surgeon course and all those different things, then they kind of they didn't see that. The first thing they saw is maybe that you got there because of something else. So those were and that was rare. It was very rare, but it was out there. Again, being at Fort Benning, Georgia, sometimes the patients there, when they found out who their doctor was, kind of looked and said, well, is there anyone else? Or some people who saw you and assumed that you were something other than a physician, if you were wearing scrubs. So those are just some of the experiences, but most of them, again, I would say, 99% was positive because we were fellow soldiers. I felt that, both at the academy at West Point, even though there was more issues with women at West Point than there were necessarily at the time of other type of minority, even though that was still an issue. But for the most part, mostly positive, but there were those pockets of those individuals who can really, kind of take the wind out of your sails when you're going along thinking you're doing okay and everybody's doing well. And someone will remind you it's not all necessarily, we all haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, well said. And for those who've never been to Columbus, Georgia, in Fort Benning, it is the home of the infantry and now the home of the cavalry and the armor. And it is and has been a bastion for male service members for many, many years. And even now, those glass ceilings are being broken with female armor officers and female Ranger School graduates and female infantry platoon leaders coming out of there. And much of that is due to the unblinking leadership that you presented, even starting back there, Nadja. So how about you, those first couple of years? What challenges or what surprises did you have coming out of Howard and coming out of Washington, D.C., and then suddenly you're in the Air Force?
Well, I'll tell you, Mike, and Nadja, in some respects, there's very similar sort of experiences. Because I was an Air Force ROTC scholarship winner, my first assignment was from the Air Force was right to graduate school. And the Air Force assigned me to one of their new civilian programs for graduate engineering education, New Mexico State University. And so I traversed from Washington, D.C. across country for the very first time in my life, and which was frightening for somebody, like I said, who had never really been outside of D.C. I will tell you, for those who are born and raised in Texas, if you will, I think the most depressing day I've ever experienced in my life was the day I was traveling across country by myself in my car, and I crossed into the Texas state line, and all I saw was nothing but flat land there for a period of time with nobody around. So that was quite a cultural shock for me. So my first year was in the Air Force was as a graduate engineer. And ironically, because New Mexico State is a minority serving institute for primarily Hispanic, a lot of Hispanic, not primarily, a lot of Hispanic students, there were some similar sort of experiences, if you will, from the standpoint of education. I wasn't sure, coming out of a historical black college and then going into a minority serving institute at New Mexico State, that I was getting the same kind of education that other people did. So I had doubts, if you will, when I finished that and went to my first real assignment in the Air Force out at Los Angeles to the Air Force Space Organization as a young rocket engineer. That was my job, first real job as a young rocket engineer. And I wasn't sure how well equipped I was for that sort of environment. I had my own doubts, but I quickly learned that I was well prepared from that historical black college and from that minority serving institute in New Mexico. And what I did experience, though, just like Nadja experienced, was going to meetings with rocket engineers and from various companies, major companies, aerospace companies, going into meetings where I was in charge because I was running the programs for the United States Air Force. But they weren't quite sure who I was in some respects. And so there are a lot of doubts as to who is this young whippersnapper lieutenant and captain who's trying to lead us. And why does he think that he can do that? And surely, as an African American, he's not as good as we are. And I faced those challenges and was able to overcome them, not with any arrogance or anything, but just by proving to people that I was up for the job and that I knew what I was doing. Nadja, in her experiences as a doctor, to show them that I was just as good, if not better, than they were at my particular profession at the time. So it was, there were some challenges there, not as many as I expected, but there were some challenges, and certainly some people who expressed their concerns that I wasn't equal to the task, which I had to prove that I was.
When I consider these things, especially in your youth, and as we speak to our youth, let's say someone under 30 is youthful to me today, but you know, I can imagine that it took great personal strength. It took some kind of skills to reject rejection. I love that saying, and then also some kind of belief. Um, Beyond the personal strength, just not to wilt, but a belief that you were in the right place and doing the right thing. How did that play out? Where did you draw on that personal strength in your youth, and how would you tell our listeners that, one, you gotta be strong and go back to that place where you have that strength, and then you gotta believe that despite an obstacle or something that's unfair, you gotta believe what you're all about. But Nadia, I'll start with you.
Yeah, Mike, and that's it all started at home. Again, you'll see a theme here. I mean, my parents. So my background, I didn't specifically mention, but I'm one of 12 adopted children. My parents were true saints. So they and I'm the youngest of 12. And so if they'd stopped at 11, I'd have been out of luck. But so 12 kids from two very humble people. My mom grew up in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Her one of 7 kids. Her dad was a bellhop at the Arlington Hotel in Hot Springs. And that's what his wages were back then. My dad from New Orleans, and so they were people of very strong faith. And I'm not proselytizing here, but you asked me what I relied on, and it was my faith. My parents taught us values. They taught us. I mean, we went to mass every Sunday, and there was just my mom was just that was her rock. Anytime anything would happen, she had a strong faith that someone greater than ourselves is looking out for us, and there has to be a belief in something greater than us, and also a belief in oneself. That's what my parents always tried to teach me, is that and it took me a long time, because your parents tell you things and you think, well, they're going to say that because they're your parents, and they're going to tell you everything. You belong exactly where God planted you and all that. And it took me a while to understand that they're absolutely right. You have to have a faith, you have to have a belief in yourself, and then not let the naysayers. And I guess the new phrase now is haters going to hate. But the naysayers and people who will bring you down, just try not to. And again, it's hard because, especially as a young 17-year-old going to West Point, it's hard to, have that maturity to say, I belong here. And I have, the strength of my faith to keep me going. But that's what kept me going. And then the example, like I mentioned about my dad, 33 years in the Army. I know he saw a lot at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. That's where the color troops, was what they were called back then, did basic training. But he, anything that I went through could not have, been as hard as what my parents went through growing up. So just looking back at them as the heroes who, and I thought I was having a bad day. Some of their stories, when I recalled those, kind of made me stop feeling sorry for myself. And then again, that strong faith that they instilled upon on all of us kids.
Thank you. Yeah, General Lyles, how about you in terms of this personal inner strength? Where it derived, and then also a belief in where you were going, that you knew despite the naysayers and the haters will hate.
Well, like Nadja, faith and family really was the root, if you will, of my ability to overcome any of the challenges or even doubts that I may have had. My father was a common laborer. He only had an 8th grade education, but he was such a hard worker in supporting the family. My mother had been a teacher, but because of health problems, she could no longer do that. And so she ended up primarily working as an assistant to one of the deans at Howard University. But I really saw the two of them, one with their strong faith, their religious faith, and the belief in God and what they instilled in my brother and me. But the way that particularly my father worked hard to support the family and worked hard to instill the love and belief in education, even though he was not highly educated himself. And that sort of fortitude, if you will, and attitude was sort of stayed with me in every respect. But I admitted in the previous question, I had doubts when I first went to my first job in the Air Force because of having come from a different environment than others in major schools, et cetera. And I quickly found that those doubts were not warranted, and again that I was just as good as anybody else. And once that I believed that myself, certainly my parents believed it. Once I believed that myself, there was sort of no stopping, if you will, to keep pushing on and doing the best that I could in every job that I had. So having the combination of proving it to myself, but also the fortitude and the what I learned from my parents, I think were sort of the bedrock to carry me through anything.
Excellent. And then, as you got downstream a little bit, you started watching other leaders and meeting and creating relationships with mentors. What did you look for in a mentor, and who were mentors of yours, both African American and white or non-African American, as you got into that 8 to 16 years of service? Nadja, I'll let you take the first swing again.
Yeah, Mike, and mentorship is so important. And a lot of some of the younger officers ask me about mentorship and how to find a mentor. And there have been so many that I've had, and I tell them there's several categories. There may be mentors that you never know are there. They're the ones behind the scenes, kind of doing things, paving the way just by their own example, or kind of cutting back the brush so you can kind of follow in their footsteps. Then there's other mentors where you may just see once that might pass you in a sitting on a train or a plane or something, and you just have a conversation, or you meet with them and they give you some advice or ideas that can change your life, change your trajectory. And that happened with me just even applying to medical school, just in an elevator ride at Walter Reed Hospital to visit my dad who was ill. One of the other individuals on the elevator was a West Pointer who was a physician, and kind of motivated me to overcome that self-doubt, because I was a senior at West Point. I had my uniform on, so he recognized that I was a firstie, a senior, and he basically struck a conversation. And just the one of the comments he made to me is when I said, well, I'm not going to apply to medical school because I probably will never get in. And he's like, why not? And then he said, what's the worst that can happen if you apply? They can say no. And guess what? Then you can either move on or figure out what you need to do to get it to yes. And so that was just a one-time conversation that really changed my trajectory. And then there are other mentors that I've had that have really, several of them that have just kind of helped me throughout my career, told me what I needed to hear when I needed to hear it. And some even told me, some even offered to be mentors, even when I didn't realize I needed that mentoring. And so there's a whole array of them, and they've been in all shapes, sizes, colors. In fact, some of my the best mentors I've had were people who look nothing like me. One was a self-proclaimed redneck from Alabama that was in aviation, doctor, aviator. And so, but if I had thought of my biases, saying, well, he probably doesn't want to, have anything to do with me or talk to me because he probably has these all preconceived ideas. I'm the one that was putting up the barriers, and he was the one that was able to, provide me good recommendations just from a perspective. Hey, doc, here's what you need to do. Let me tell you what I see when I see the docs. You guys need to do, this, or here's what I would recommend. So he was able to provide a perspective. And then if I start naming names, I know I'm going to miss some, but there were General Austin was one of my all-time, favorite mentors. General Dempsey, I got a chance to work for him. What an awesome leader. One of the first individuals who really taught me that it was really the confidence, the confident, a leader having confidence in you and what that can do as a boost. And that was General Casey, who, when I was the 1st Armored Division surgeon, he was the division commander. And again, if I start naming them, I'm going to miss some, but those are the ones. And then, of course, there were a ton in the medical field. A lot of those, senior leaders, but I was just mentioning some that are kind of outside of my purview that ended up being, phenomenal mentors for me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that with us, and again for our viewers, what insightful comments from Nadja, because some will often try to give you a cookbook of who should be your mentor, or often they'll tell you latch onto the coattails of the person who's going to propel your your trajectory and your career, and often the least likely are the ones that propel you the most. But General Lyles, I welcome your comments on mentorship also.
Well, first, Mike, I have to tell you, I'm really enjoying listening to Nadja and her experiences again, because there's so much parallel, if you will, between the kind of things that she's experienced and the things either I experienced many years before her. She's so young, and the kind of things I talk to people about. And just like you just mentioned, Mike, I tell people I love to talk about mentoring, but the first thing I tell people is a mentor does not have to look like you. A lot of people think a mentor has to be like a frat brother or a sorority sister, somebody who has to look just like you and have the same kind of background, et cetera. And that's not the case at all. Almost anybody could be a mentor. It could be somebody who's even beneath you in terms of rank, who helped you out at just that critical time that you needed some help. And in my case, my first mentor certainly didn't look like me. It was an older white engineer out at Los Angeles when I was a young lieutenant as a space vehicle rocket engineer. And at the time, this will probably really date me here, there was an incident that happened in the country called Kent State. And several students, 5 I think, who were shot and killed at Kent State, who were protesting the war in Vietnam. And I was a young, brand new lieutenant out at Los Angeles. And what struck me was not just the killing, but it was the attitude of the young officers and even some middle and senior officers out at Los Angeles Air Force Base at the time. They thought it was funny. A lot of them thought it was funny that these snotty little college kids got shot because they were protesting the war. And that immediately told me that this is not what I want to do the rest of my career. I don't want to be part of an organization and people in the Air Force if this is the way they feel. And so I made a declaration that after my commitment was over at that assignment, I was going to get out of the Air Force. I immediately had this older white engineer come up to me and pull me aside and said, please don't leave the Air Force, because what you're expressing is a diverse feeling and position than what some of the others are. And the Air Force needs diverse views. The Air Force needs people with different backgrounds, and they need different and diverse views. Please hang in there, and you'll find a lot of people like you, but you'll also find that your diverse view will serve the Air Force well in so many different capacities. He was a mentor, and I didn't realize that at the time. I don't even know if he even knew that he was mentoring me, but that was the first one, and it made me stay in the Air Force. And I've had lots of mentors since then throughout my 36 years of service. Some were junior to me, some were enlisted in mentoring me, some were older. They were Black, they were white, they were Hispanic, they were Asian, they were engineers like me, and some who were not. So anybody could be a mentor, if you will, to help you at just that right time. And the thing I tell young people is, if you need help, don't be afraid to ask somebody for help. Almost any person, it's human nature. I don't care whether they're a redneck, if you will, or whatever it might be. Almost any person, if you ask them for help, they will give it to you. And that person will be the mentor you need at just the right time. So I really believe in mentorship, but I also believe that anybody could do that particular role.
I so appreciate the comments, and I couldn't agree more. And I want everyone to take to heart that this is a program that we've put together for Black History Month. Um, but the discussions are amazing because mentorship and leadership, I like to say all the time is winners leave clues. And if you don't pick up the clues, then you're obviously clueless, right? And so in this case, we're looking through the lens of two amazing leaders uh, who have the character and integrity that they've spoken to, but more often or moreover displayed for 40 years, 45 years of service, um, so that you as the listeners understand that you will make a difference in someone's life. You will be the leader that makes that difference, and in order to do that, then you're going to have to fall back on your leadership and your character, and because this question we have a few more minutes, but did you think when you were in that elevator that you would be the Surgeon General of the U.S. Army someday? And did you think it was even possible for a female to be the Surgeon General or an African American female? And sir, did you think when you went to New Mexico en route to Los Angeles that you would end up as a four-star general in the Air Force? General Lyles, I'll let you go first this time.
The answer, of course, is no, Mike. And it's um, again, it's one of those things that you look back and you wonder, what was I thinking at that particular? Certainly didn't think that. I had no interest or even desire. And as I tell people, and I'm sure Nadja and you, Mike, feel the same way. I had no aspiration of being a general officer. I had no thought that I would be a general officer. What I did have was the thought that I wanted to be the best engineer I could be at any job that was given to me. And that's one of the advice I give to anybody. I give it to young students. I give it to whatever career field. Whatever you're doing, do the best and be the best that you can be at that particular job. And particularly in almost every case, people will notice if you are the best. It may not be obvious to you sometimes that people are noticing you, but that attitude of being the best and knowing the job better than anyone is not something that everybody does. And you will stand out with your peers just by being the best that you can be at that particular profession. And so that's really sort of kept me going, and literally throughout my career in every position that I had. And I think it's good advice to be the best that you can be. I know "be the best you can be" is an Army term, so
We'll take it.
guys that say that, but it really stands out.
It works. It works for all of us. Nadja, how about you in terms of, it's easy to get lost in the chaff and in the gorilla dust of the day, and so as a dreamer and a visionary that a leader has to be, how did you stay grounded, feet on the ground, and yet still looking for how you could make the biggest impact possible, which meant you had to progress?
Yeah, that's a hard one. And just to kind of backtrack to the last question about mentors, I have a new one in General Lyles. I mean, some of the comments are just awesome. His insights and things. I'm sitting here learning. I was listening so much, I almost forgot to listen to what your question was. But how to keep grounded. Well, first of all, having kids keeps you grounded because it reminds you that it's not about it's not about you. It's not about me. And that's what our parents told us. It's not about your life is not your own. They mean, and that sounds kind of strange. It's like your life is not your own because God has a plan for you, and your job is to figure it out and then do the best that you can to do the best in the to the best for as many people as you can. And so that's what kept me grounded, and it keeps me humble. I mean, just look at my background. Like I said, it would be really hard if for me, or I should be ashamed of myself if I was really impressed with myself and what I've done, because where I came from, I mean, I was an orphan with an uncertain future, and I could have easily wandered off the face of the earth if my parents hadn't been assigned to the same location that where I was. And so that keeps me humble because everything else after that is gift and grace, and I'm thankful for it. And so that's what kind of keeps me grounded, is that things could have gone very differently for me to have the opportunity to be part of the greatest military on the face of the earth, and then to be in a healing profession is such an honor, and that's kind of keeps me grounded. And then the men and women that I used to be responsible for, those 130,000 Army Medical Department, men and women who were looking to me to make sure I was providing the best leadership, the best direction for them, to ensure that our mission to conserve our fighting strength, to keep our soldiers and their families and our retirees and everyone that we were responsible for healthy. That's very humbling, and that keeps you grounded. And you have to rely on other people to help you in achieving that. It can't be about, hey, I know that I have all the answers. I don't have all the answers. I probably don't have most of the answers, and most of those around me are the ones that are the true heroes in making the difference. And so that kind of kept me rowing in the right direction and not getting too impressed with what I was doing. Because it was all about those people that I was leading that were the impressive ones.
That's great. Those are really great comments. And often we're told, if you really think you're impressive, tell someone else's cat to sit and watch what happens. Right? As I'm interested, and I know everyone else who will see this is interested, if we consider Dr. King's message of inclusion and equality in our lives, then what advice would you give to young African Americans who are in the business world or beginning a life in the business world? Sure.
Well, Mike, I think I may have mentioned this during the honor I had of speaking as your Veterans Day speaker at the museum. But again, because of my difference in age between me and you, and certainly me and Nadja, every time Dr. King's name comes up, it really resonates with me because I was there on the 28th of August in 1963 as a young freshman at Howard University, 17-year-old, had just graduated from high school. And I was there in Washington, D.C. on that March of Freedom March, marching down Constitution Avenue with no idea whatsoever of what it is I was doing. As I jokingly tell people, and this is a true story, I was there along with a couple of the guys from my neighborhood with me. We were there because we were young teenagers, and we knew there'd be girls there. And so we were marching in that event for that reason. And then we got to the reflecting pool around the Lincoln Memorial. And when Martin Luther King started speaking, and particularly when he started talking about I Have a Dream, and I looked around me and saw all the different people from every background, every age, every color, it really hit me as to what he was the message he was conveying, and really what it meant to everybody. So I resonate with everything that Martin Luther King was all about and the things that he talked about. But I particularly reflect on those things that he talked about that dealt with humility. Whenever I give a speech or have an opportunity to talk about Martin Luther King during Black History Month or during his birthday celebration, I reflect on one of his not well-known stories, if you will, or poems, where he talked about being a street cleaner, if you will, a janitor. And a person should be the best street cleaner that he could be, if you will, and people will admire that. And it sort of reflects the comment I made earlier of being the best that you can be. And I tell that to people again, of being the best really at your particular job really stands out. And it really will serve you well, whoever you might be, and whatever it is you're trying to do, if you sort of remember that. I also believe in, when I think of Martin Luther King, about communication. And I'm a big believer that the three best words of any leadership or any activity is communicate, communicate, communicate.
Oh, great.
And I remind people of that as a good engineer, particularly, communication is definitely not all about transmitting. It's more about receiving. And if you listen to people in whatever job you're doing, if you listen to your mentors, listen to the people who work for you, listen to those around you, listen to your kids, if that's what you're all about, and just listen to what is bothering them and what the issues are, and try to resonate and understand that, you will be a lot better off in anything that you strive to do. So Martin Luther King sort of, if you will, is, again, the bedrock for a lot of the things I've been able to do, both in my life and in my career. And I try to convey that to people in some form or another in talking about him.
That's fantastic. And Nadja, sort of same question to you, but also give it a reflection, not as you would, communicate with young African American or even young non-African American with regard to inclusion and diversity, and also what it all means to you to have uh, this month designated as Black History Month.
Yeah, again, I will say what General Lyle said. I mean, that was awesome. I mean, Martin Luther King, did an understatement of the century to say he touched millions of lives, and you being in the great state of Ohio, I'll give a plug to the Kirwan Institute at Ohio State University. Did a reading where they had several leaders throughout the Ohio, city governor, all read segments of Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail. And I think any young person who's not read it or heard it, just the reading of it through there were judges, there were athletes, there were all these individuals from Ohio State and all around the state, and it really brought home the message, and and just the meaning of having a month dedicated to learning about what not only the dream that he mentioned, but just the way Martin Luther King Jr. articulated what the purpose of moving forward, the importance of diversity and inclusion. And as a medical professional, diversity is important for the survival of the species, right? There's genetic recombination. You hear of areas where there's not enough diversity in the gene pool, that you have emergence of illnesses and diseases that would be suppressed if you had a wide range of diverse, genetic background to kind of even out and tamp down some of those things that might come up. Diversity in agriculture, rotating crops, diversity. I mean, so it's actually, in my opinion, it's a no-brainer that diversity in every aspect is important. So it's the same thing amongst human beings and individuals who are contributing to a mission. So I would tell young people to really, focus on that. Focus on the importance, the things that you bring, the perspective that you bring, and then the perspective that others bring. So it's not, as General Lyle said, it's also the listening part. Yes, you can bring something, but what can others bring for the betterment of the organization, team, whatever entity of which you're a part, and to continue to strive and work hard for that and that message.
Great.
Mike,
Yeah,
if I could just add to that, if you will, particularly about because it's a subject that I resonate or talk to people about more so today. People say diversity and inclusion, and there have been a lot of questions as to what does inclusion really mean. Some people have asked that. And I recall a couple years ago, I had the honor of getting an award from the National Association of Corporate Directors, NACD, for all the board work that I've done over the last several years or since I retired. And part of that led to my co-chairing a blue ribbon panel for NACD, looking at corporate boards of the future, and particularly looking at how they deal with diversity and inclusion in the corporate world today. And my co-chair, Carrie Dominguez, the Honorable Carrie Dominguez, who used to serve in one of the government agencies, if you will, had a quote that I thought was so very, very good about inclusion. I had one too, and I'll tell you mine first. And I used to tell people that diversity without inclusion is just an illusion. And that's sort of rang to some people, if you will.
I like it.
But Carrie's, to me, was even more appropriate. She said, diversity is about counting heads around the table. Inclusion is about making sure that every head counts. In other words, and I've seen this, I know Nadja's seen it, I know you've probably seen it too, Mike, where we have a diverse audience and people are talking about a subject or even giving comments. It's happened to me many times. And then nothing happens. A little while later, somebody with a different skin color says the same thing, and all of a sudden everybody resonates and says, "Oh, what a great idea." What that says is you may have been diverse part of the audience, but nobody was really listening to you, and nobody really included you in the thought process that this person could add value. And so, to me, inclusion is even more important than diversity. It's making sure that people really take you seriously and really make sure that you're adding value, and people are paying attention to the value you bring to whatever the subject is.
Fantastic, sir. And I think I was at the NACD dinner that night with Lou Von Thayer and others. And I think I met you a second time there. And it was a fitting recognition of who you are and what you've done for so many others.
Well, thank you.
I hate to admit that we're out of time. I do believe that everyone that is able to see and listen to the words that you presented and the thoughts and your hearts being open to us, well, I know that they'll profit and benefit from it. Every week at the National Veterans Memorial Museum, we do a win of the week, and we convene the entire team on Friday, and everyone from the front desk newest person to me and everyone in between has to give a win of the week. And so I already know my win of the week, and that was to be able to spend time with each of you today, to get to know you even better, and to really have you stretch me out in terms of thinking even harder, more and better about how to take care of people and make a difference so much. So I'll allow, if you'd like any closing comment, Nadja, and then General Lyles, and then we'll do a wrap.
No, I just want to say thank you so much for this opportunity to be able to spend time with you and General Lyles. It's been really my honor, my pleasure, and I appreciate Mike what you're doing at the museum to recognize the contributions that African American men and women have had in our military history, since the founding of our nation. So thank you so much for that and this opportunity.
My pleasure. Great to see you.
And Mike, let me just say the same thing. I want to thank you and certainly thank Nadja. This is a great opportunity for me to get to know her a little better. And Mike, I can't tell you how much I value what you and your team are doing at the museum. And you can count me in to helping you in any way you can. And Nadja, if there's ever any opportunity to work with you or support you or any of your activities, don't hesitate to call upon me. We found out earlier we have a George Washington University connection. Nadja went to George Washington University Med School. One of my twin daughters went to GW Med School. She graduated in 2008, so a little bit later. Her twin sister graduated from GW Law School in 2007, and Nadja's daughter also graduated from GW Law School. So we have a kindred spirit, and I think it's always fate and the blessing of the Lord that you get a chance to find out how much that we people have in common.
Well said, sir, and so true. And what a great day to be a veteran, and a great day to be a part of this program with you. For everyone out there, go forth, check on somebody. Everyone's working an issue. The text you send this afternoon and this evening to a friend might make a difference in their life. So hesitate not to ask that question, how you doing, and may I help? So this, as we wrap up, the National Veterans Memorial Museum is a nonprofit organization. And I am shameless to say that we don't receive any funding from the federal or state or local government, and that all of our operating costs and programs comes from the generosity of our members, donors, and corporate sponsors. So if able, consider becoming a member to help us provide great programs such as this today. And like I said, the first year I was bashful about asking people to support us with money, and I'm no longer bashful about that, because I know their support, they're contributing to somebody's life by bringing the two of you to our audience today. So God bless you both, and thank you very much. So great to see you again, and don't slow down in all that you're doing. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Nadja. God bless you. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
The National Veterans Memorial and Museum began with a vision from the late Senator John Glenn, who understood the value of telling and sharing the story of our veterans. From the initial view, the architecture impresses upon visitors the importance of what lies within. Seeming to rise organically from the earth, the building itself is a symbol of our nation's veterans and their resilient spirit and unending commitment to making this country stronger. Once inside the museum, visitors embark on a narrative journey, following exhibitions that focus on the servicemen and women and their families. Individual stories and shared experiences are illustrated through personal artifacts, quotes, letters, photographs, and powerful films of veterans telling their unique story in their own words. The National Veterans Memorial and Museum. It's more than a museum. It's the new home of the brave. Plan your visit today.